Welcome, dear listener, to a place where time has gently folded in upon itself, where the bustle of the modern world has dissolved into nothing more than a distant, half-remembered hum. Allow your shoulders to soften, allow your breath to slow, allow your eyes, if they have not already done so, to drift gently closed. Tonight we are journeying together, not through the bright rush of the present, but backward, through quiet centuries of falling snow, into a hushed corner of the new world as it once was, long ago. Imagine, if you will, a winter's evening in the Hudson Valley, in the year of our Lord 1750. The world above the river is wrapped in a great, soft hush of pale blue twilight. Snow falls slowly, in feather-like drifts, settling upon the bare branches of oak and maple, upon the rounded shoulders of distant hills, and upon the broad fieldstone walls of a low, sturdy farmhouse that waits just ahead of us in the gathering dark. Smoke curls from its single chimney in a slow, lazy ribbon, dissolving into the violet sky. There is no hurry here. There is nowhere we must be. There is only this gentle approach, this soft path of crunching snow, and this old wooden door waiting at the end of our quiet journey. Listen. Breathe. Feel yourself becoming weightless, soft as the falling snow, slowly drawn into the warm amber glow that flickers behind small frost-laced panes of imperfect hand-blown glass. Before we step across that warm threshold, before our boots cross from snow-deep night into firelit warmth, pause with me here for a moment. Beneath the slow, drifting flakes, the wind is barely whispering through the pines, and we are alone with the soft music of winter. If you wish to continue these long, lantern-lit journeys with me, these slow walks through forgotten centuries, these quiet visits to vanished kitchens and sleeping villages, then consider gently leaving a mark of your presence here. Simple touch upon the small bell, a whispered yes to subscribing, and these stories will find you again, like a candle set in a window for a returning traveller. There is no urgency, there is no insistence, only an open door and a fire kept burning for you. Should you feel moved, you might also leave a sentence or two below this tale telling me from which quiet corner of the wide world you are listening tonight. I'm always softly delighted to learn whether you rest beneath a heavy quilt in some northern country, or drift off in a warm room while gentle rains fall beyond your window. Each small comment becomes a glowing lantern in this long darkness. But for now, let all such gentle matters rest. Loosen your hold upon the day. The latch awaits. The snow falls softly. And the old stone farmhouse, patient as the very earth it is built upon, opens its weathered wooden door to welcome us at last. The door before us is a humble, beautiful thing fashioned from broad planks of oak that have weathered through more than half a century of seasons. It has been split horizontally into two halves in the old Dutch fashion that the settlers carried with them across the wide grey Atlantic, so that on milder days the upper half might be opened to admit the breeze and the soft chatter of barn swallows, while the lower half remained shut against the wandering of small chickens and inquisitive geese. Tonight, of course, both halves are firmly closed, sealed against the cold, their iron hinges dark with age and quietly speckled with frost. Small wrought iron knocker shaped like a curling fern frond hangs at the height of a grown man's chest, and the latch beneath it is worn to a soft silver shine by the press of countless thumbs over countless winters. We need not knock, we are gentle visitors of the imagination drawn quietly inward, and the latch lifts beneath an unseen hand with a small, contented click. The lower half of the door swings inward with a long, low sigh of well-greased iron, and we step across the broad stone sill, a single slab of bluestone hewn from the riverbank cliffs many miles to the south, polished to a deep, warm gloom by the passage of many feet, be the scrape of leather boots and wooden clogs by the soft brush of long woolen skirts. We are inside now in the small front passage that the family calls the voorhuis. Here the air immediately changes, becoming heavier and warmer, fragrant with the layered scents of a long-inhabited home. There is the faint, almost peppery aroma of dried bayberry hanging in bunches from a low ceiling beam, ready to be rolled into pale green candles when the household has need of them. There is the sweeter, slightly resinous breath of pine boards underfoot, scrubbed clean only that morning with sand and lye soap, still holding the cold ghost of soapy water in their grain. There is the deep, comforting undertone of wood smoke that has soaked, year after year, into every fibre of the house, into the rafters and the lime-washed walls and the long iron pegs along which heavy cloaks now hang. Single cloak draws the eye, the largest of them, of a deep indigo wool that drinks in what little light reaches it. Snow that fell upon its broad shoulders only an hour ago has half melted now, beading along its surface in slow, glistening droplets. The wool itself is faintly damp to the touch, releasing into the air a quiet animal scent of lanolin, that ancient sheepish warmth that all wool seems to carry, even when the sheep themselves are long ago folded into sleep in their distant pen. Beside it hang two smaller cloaks, sized for half-grown children, and beneath these wait the small, sturdy boots of the household, lined up carefully against the wall in descending order of size, like a row of solemn little dark ducklings. To the right of the voorhuis, a low, slightly arched doorway leads onward into the great room of the house. The doorway is framed in dark hand-hewn beams, each one cut from a single trunk of chestnut, and the marks of the broad axe are still faintly visible in their smoothed surfaces, like the soft ripples left in sand by the retreating tide. We pass beneath this doorway slowly, ducking our heads only the slightest amount, and we step at last into the warm heart of this small wintering world. The great room is broad and low, longer than it is wide, with whitewashed plaster walls between exposed beams of darkened oak. The ceiling above is composed of these heavy beams running parallel from wall to wall, with the underside of the upper floorboards visible between them, and from one such beam there hangs a curing ham in a sleeve of muslin, gently darkened with smoke, swaying almost imperceptibly in the slow draught. The floor here is broader than in the voorhuis, made of wide pine planks, some of them nearly 20 inches across, cut from trees that grew in this very valley before any European foot had walked among them. A long pewter charger sits upon a low oak chest against the far wall, catching and holding the firelight in a soft, milky glow, and beside it stands a single brass candlestick, its candle yet unlit, waiting. Above this chest hangs a small wooden frame containing a piece of needlework done in the careful tight stitches of a child's hand, an alphabet sampler in faded crimson and indigo thread, the letters slightly uneven, charming in their gentle imperfection. The thread spells out, in the patient lettering of an 8-year-old girl named Antje, the years of her own family, births, baptisms, the date of her grandfather's voyage from Old Amsterdam, each entry surrounded by a tiny, delicate border of stitched tulips and small green vines. The room breathes a slow, deep warmth, but the principal source of that warmth is yet to be properly seen. We are aware of it more as a presence than as an object, a great glowing throb of heat at the room's far end, behind a slightly bulging plaster wall through which we have not yet passed. Soon we shall come to it. Soon we shall stand before that wide, jambless hearth and gaze into the slow red and gold animal of its flames, but not yet. For now we linger here, in this softly furnished room, and allow our eyes to adjust to the dim light, allow our breath to slow into rhythm with the breathing of the house itself. Long oak table fills the centre of the room, its surface scarred with the faint hieroglyphic record of years of use. The small dark ring left by a hot iron pot set down too quickly, the long scratch from a dropped paring knife, the soft pale circles where wet earthenware mugs have rested again and again. 6 low sturdy chairs surround the table, each with a rush-woven seat that has been mended and remended over the years. A single stoneware pitcher stands at the centre of the table, cobalt blue glaze around its rounded shoulder, glinting faintly. The pitcher is empty now, but in its bowl rests a sprig of dried lavender, brought up from the herb garden last summer, still releasing its calm and powdery sweetness into the air. Beside the table, in the corner nearest the unseen fire, an old wooden cradle rests at gentle rest upon its curved rockers, empty for tonight, draped only with a folded coverlet of soft, undyed linen. Above it, hanging from a peg, is a small wooden rattle carved into the shape of a fish, its mouth open in a perpetual silent song. The cradle and the rattle wait in quiet patience for the next small life that will come to fill them, and they seem to dream in their stillness of all the tiny lives that have passed through them already, generation upon generation, each one held briefly, gently, then released into the larger world. We stand here for a long, hushed moment, allowing the warmth of this great room to wrap softly about our shoulders. The wind outside touches the small windows in a long, sighing breath. A floorboard somewhere overhead creaks and is still, and we feel ourselves growing softer, slower, drawn deeper into the listening peace of this old, gently breathing house. Now, at last, we move toward the source of all this gentle warmth. We step softly past the long table and through a wide, plastered opening in the inner wall, an opening trimmed with a heavy oak beam blackened by the breath of countless winter fires, and we find ourselves before the heart of the house, the great open hearth, broad as the open arms of a generous grandmother, glowing with the slow red light of a well-tended evening fire. This is the jambless hearth, the kind the Dutch settlers brought with them from the old country and refused to surrender even after the English came and changed the colony's name. It is not, like the English fireplaces of the same century, recessed deeply into the wall and bordered by stout protruding jambs of brick or stone. No, this hearth is shallow and wide, almost an open stage, its fire built directly upon the broad stone floor of the firebox. Above the flames, a great hood of plaster and lath descends from the high ceiling, sloping inward like the lower half of a tent, gathering the smoke and shepherding it upward to the chimney's mouth. The hood is whitewashed, but the years of smoke have stained the lower edge of the whitewash to a soft, smoky gold, deepening to a warm umber where the hood meets the lintel beam. From this great oaken lintel, a single iron pole runs horizontally across the breadth of the hearth, its surface darkened to a glossy black by the kiss of innumerable fires. From this pole hang a series of wrought iron pothooks in graduated sizes, each one curling like a question mark, each one bearing some part of the household's quiet labour, a small copper kettle here, half filled with cider, that has been gently warming itself for the last hour. Heavier iron kettle there, suspended over the deepest part of the embers, in which a slow stew of mutton, carrots, and barley has been murmuring since mid-afternoon. The fire itself is composed of 3 logs of seasoned oak, laid carefully one upon the other in the manner of a small leaning house. The lowest log is nearly burned through to a soft white-furred ash, a delicate skeleton that still glows along its hidden length with a slow breathing red. The middle log is well caught now, its surface cracked into a glittering pattern of orange fissures, like the windows of a tiny city seen from a great distance at evening. The top log has only just begun to surrender, the bark blackening, small blue flames licking shyly along its underside, releasing every now and then a soft musical pop as a hidden pocket of sap finally yields to the warmth. Around the hearthstones, the iron tools of the fire stand at quiet attention. A long pair of fire tongs leans against the stone, their handles worn smooth by the fingers of 3 generations. Heavy brass-handled poker hangs from a nail in the lintel, its tip dark and slightly bent from years of patient stirring. A hearth broom made of split corn husks bound with twine rests upright in the corner, its frayed bristles gone grey with ash. Near the floor, a pewter ash pail squats on 3 small feet, its belly half full of soft pale grey ashes that will be carried out at morning and saved for the soap-making come spring. The stones of the hearth itself deserve our slow attention. They are large, rough-shaped pieces of bluestone, fitted together in the dry-built fashion of the Hudson Valley masons, each stone chosen for the way it sits against its neighbours. The mortar between them is a rough, sandy lime, thick in places and almost vanished in others. Long use has rounded the edges of every stone, and on the broad slab that serves as the front sill of the hearth, the fingertips of the housewife and her daughters have left a faint polished trail along the place where they kneel to tend the embers each evening. The stones are warm to the touch, a deep, friendly warmth that you might press your palm against and hold there long. Above the hearth, set into the sloping plaster of the hood, a small iron crane has been fitted, an arm that swings outward over the floor of the hearth and back again. From its hook tonight hangs a covered earthenware crock, dark brown and glazed in a thin, glossy slip the colour of strong tea. Within the crock a small batch of apple butter is being slowly thickened, a pursuit that has occupied the better part of 2 days, with the housewife stirring it now and again with a long wooden spoon, drawing up rich mahogany-coloured ribbons that smell of cinnamon, clove and the late autumn orchard. The fragrance of this apple butter perfumes the entire room, an aroma so deeply comforting that it seems almost a substance one could lean against, almost a soft cushion of scent that the entire household leans into without thinking. To one side of the hearth, set into the stone wall itself, a small arched recess has been left, a niche perhaps 18 inches wide and 12 inches deep. This is the warming niche, where a small bowl of porridge or a small dish of buttermilk might be set to keep gently warm without scorching. Tonight, within this niche there rests a single small earthenware pot of milk that has been sweetened with a pinch of brown sugar and a single bruised cardamom pod, gently warming for the youngest child of the household, who will, in the next hour, be cradled and given a small cup of this milk before being carried to bed. The pot's surface is just beginning to stir with the ghost of a coming simmer, a barely visible tremble at its edge, a slow waking of warmth. Near the right side of the hearth, just where the warm stones meet the broad pine floorboards, a small wooden footstool waits, low and broad, the kind upon which an old grandfather might rest his feet as he dozes by the fire. The stool is made of a single thick slab of cherry wood, its top worn to a deep ruddy gloss by the long pressure of many tired heels. Beside it, on the floor, lies a thick rag rug, woven of long strips of worn-out clothing, old shirts, old aprons, old children's gowns, all braided into a thick soft coil and stitched into a rough oval. The rug is the colours of an old garden in autumn, faded indigo, soft rose, pale yellow, the gentle green of long-rinsed parsley, and it cushions the bare feet of any child who comes to sit before the fire on a cold morning. We stand here, our faces touched by the slow-breathing warmth, our eyes filled with the gentle motion of the flames. We breathe in the apple butter and the wood smoke, and the dim animal sweetness of the wool in the next room. Our shoulders, which were once tense with the cares of some other place and time, now slowly soften as the fire itself softens the great oak logs into ash, returning all things, in their time, to a quiet and weightless peace. To the left of the great hearth a heavy oak doorway with no door yields into a smaller chamber that the housewife of this dwelling calls, in the soft Dutch of her grandparents, the keuken. In English farmhouses of the same century, the kitchen and the hearth-room are often one and the same. But here, in the older fashion of the Low Countries, the two have been kept tenderly distinct. The hearth-room is for sitting, for sewing, for prayers, for the small ceremonies of evening. The keuken is for the steady, patient labour of feeding a household, and its character is altogether different, practical, well-organised, faintly damp, and lit just now by a single tallow candle in a tin sconce upon the wall. The walls of the keuken are lime-washed to a soft, chalky white, a white that has been gently yellowed over the years by the breath of cooking and the slow climb of wood smoke. Heavy beams cross the low ceiling here as well. But in the keuken every beam has been pressed into use. From hooks driven into the seasoned wood there hang bundles of dried herbs in such abundance that the air itself seems lightly steeped in their fragrance. Long bunches of summer savoury, their tiny leaves now gone grey-green and crackly, hang beside fat bouquets of thyme and small severe sheaves of dill, the dill heads rattling faintly when one passes beneath them. Strings of red onions, plaited together by their own dried stems, hang in long glossy garlands. A single braid of garlic, snowy white and faintly tinged with violet, depends from a hook directly above the worktable. The worktable itself is the chief furniture of the room, a great long slab of pine, scrubbed and re-scrubbed across decades of mornings and evenings until its surface has gone a soft watery silver grey, soft to the touch, almost like the worn linen of an old apron. The corners of the table are slightly rounded, polished by the brushing of countless aprons, of countless hips, of countless dishes set down too hastily. In the centre of the table tonight rests a wooden trencher upon which a small mound of fresh-baked rye bread waits beneath a clean cloth, its surface still faintly warm to the press of a careful palm, the cloth giving forth, when one stoops, the deep dark fragrance of caraway and molasses. Beside the bread stands a small earthenware crock containing fresh sweet butter, pale gold, with the faint fern-like impression of a wooden butter mould upon its top, a pattern of 2 tulips bowing toward one another, made by a wooden press that the housewife's mother brought with her when she crossed the river from Albany as a young bride. Next to the butter sits a small porcelain dish of coarse salt gathered from the salt pans down on the lower river, its crystals glinting like the sand of some grey and patient inner sea. Along the back wall of the cukin runs a long shelf, and upon this shelf the cookware of the family has been arranged with the careful logic of long custom. There are heavy iron pots in graduated sizes, their bottoms blackened by years of fire, their iron handles polished by years of use to a soft, dull gleam. There are several copper saucepans, their interiors tinned to a soft silvery white, their exteriors a deep ruddy gold that catches the candlelight in long dim glints. There are a few smaller pans of brass, kept for sweets and preserves, their surfaces almost mirror-bright from yesterday's polishing with vinegar and salt. Long-handled iron skillet, broad as a dinner plate, hangs from an iron hook beneath the shelf, its surface seasoned to a deep oiled black, the very black of a still pond on a moonless night. Lower down, beneath the shelf, a wooden trough rests upon a low bench. Inside the trough, half covered by a folded linen towel, a soft white pillow of dough is slowly, sleepily rising for the morning's loaves. Set against the dough, the cloth bears the faint, ghostly outline of where a hand pressed lightly upon it some hours ago, testing its softness. The dough breathes inwardly, in the slow, almost imperceptible way of all living things asleep. Its surface domes a little higher every few minutes, with a quiet patience that asks nothing from the world but time. In the corner nearest the small back window stands the dough trough's older sister, a tall, narrow cupboard with a lattice of pierced tin in its upper doors. This is the food keep, and within its many small compartments rest the careful provisions of late January in the year 1750, a cone of brown sugar wrapped in blue paper, a small clay jar of peppercorns, another of cloves, a tiny stoppered phial of nutmeg whose mouth, when opened, releases an aroma so warm and so heady it can be tasted faintly upon the tongue. There is a wedge of dark, hard cheese, wrapped in a cloth and tied with twine. There is half a loaf of sugar from the West Indies, hard as a stone and ready to be shaved with a small iron grater for special cakes. And on the lowest shelf, in a low brown crock under a wooden lid, there is a soft, patient sleeping curd of farmer's cheese, its surface beaded with the smallest possible drops of yellow whey. Through the small window above this cupboard, one can see the backyard of the farmhouse in its winter dress. The window glass is thick and slightly wavy, hand-blown in a workshop in Albany, marked here and there with the small concentric ripples that betray the spinning of the glass-blower's iron rod. Through these gentle distortions, the snow-covered yard appears as a soft and dreamlike thing. The roof of the spring house is a low white mound. The pump, with its long iron handle, wears a stiff cap of frost. The well curb is half buried, and beyond it the bare apple trees of the orchard stand patient and angular against the deep violet of the evening sky. A small water bucket of cedar wood stands by the back door, its inside dark and wet, filled to within an inch of the rim with water drawn from the well that very afternoon, before the dark and bitter cold drove everyone within. Long-handled gourd dipper floats upon the surface of the water, knocking very gently and very rarely against the bucket's wooden side. The water is cold and slightly sweet, and its surface holds, like a small dark mirror, the wavering reflection of the candle's flame from the wall opposite. In the cukin, even now, when no one stands to stir the pot or knead the dough, the room itself is alive with a quiet vegetable readiness. Each tool is in its place, each ingredient knows its appointed task. The cukin, like a patient old workhorse, is asleep upon its feet, ready to wake at the first soft step of morning, ready to feed once again the gentle hungers of the family that has lived within these stone walls for 3 slow generations. It would be a kindness, before we wander further into the warm interior, to let our attention drift outward for a moment, to the very bones of this old farmhouse, to the stones and beams and timbers that hold its life together, that have stood patiently through some 70 winters now, through some 70 summers, through the long, slow turning of the Hudson Valley year. For this house there's no chance assembly of board and nail. It is a careful, deliberate thing, built by hands that knew the old ways and trusted them, and to understand its peace we must understand its making. The walls of the farmhouse are of field stone gathered painstakingly across the years from the tilled earth of the surrounding fields. Each stone in these walls was once an inconvenience to a ploughing horse, a hindrance to a furrow, and each stone, when discovered, was set aside upon the headland of the field and carried home in a low wooden sledge, to be added at last to the slow-rising labour of the house. The stones are of no single colour. There are blues and greys from the old riverbed limestone, deep cool stones flecked with white. There are brick reds from the iron-rich earth of a low ridge to the north. There are quiet, tawny browns from the broken edges of an old esker, and a few warm yellows from a small secret quarry just beyond the woodlot. The mortar that holds these stones together is a coarse lime mortar mixed from limestone burned in a small kiln down by the creek and slaked with fresh water and binding river sand. In places, the mortar has eroded faintly with the years, and the stones nudge through their bedding in soft, organic ways, like the rounded shoulders of patient grandmothers leaning upon one another for support. The walls are not perfectly square nor perfectly true. They have settled gently into the slope of the land. They lean inward by the merest fraction, as if the house itself is bowing slightly forward in greeting. The walls are very thick. Some 2.5 feet of solid stone separate the warm interior from the long frozen breath of the winter night. This thickness is not for any imagined defence, but for the simple practical magic of insulation. Thick stone walls hold the warmth of the hearth long into the cold hours, releasing it slowly, gently, like an old loaf of bread giving up the heat of the oven by the smallest possible degree. Thick stone walls keep the hot summer afternoons from baking the larder, keep the milk from souring, keep the pickles in their crocks gently cool. The walls are insulation, refrigeration, and shelter all at once, a triple gift from the fields the family has tilled. Inside, the lime wash applied to the stone has softened the wall to a pale, dappled white, but in places the lime has worn thin, and one can see the gentle corrugation of the underlying stones beneath, like the bones of the house pressing up through its skin. Where one's hand presses against a wall, the stone beneath the lime is still cool to the touch, even in the warmth of the great room, and that coolness is a quiet reassurance, a reminder that one stands within an enclosure that is older and more patient than one's own brief life. The roof above us is held up by a forest of timbers hewn long ago from the very forest that was felled to clear the surrounding fields. The largest beams, the great horizontal supports that span the lower ceiling, are of white oak, 12 inches square in section, their flat faces marked with the long soft scallops of the broadaxe. Each beam bears, near one end, a small Roman numeral cut into the wood, 6, 7, 8. For these beams were dressed and assembled flat upon the ground, each piece numbered before being raised, then the fashion of the old timber frame builders who carried the secrets of their trade from the Netherlands and the German states to this side of the great water. Above these large beams runs a system of smaller joists, also of oak, set close together, and above these the floorboards of the upper rooms, broad pine planks each as wide as a man's hand outstretched, fixed with hand-forged iron nails whose heads have, over the decades, been polished to a soft pewter gleam by the brushing of brooms. From below, looking upward, the entire underside of the upper floor is visible as a quiet, dim landscape of darkened wood, regular and reassuring as the lines on the palm of a familiar hand. The roof itself, far above us, is a steep gable of split oak shingles, weathered to a soft silver grey, lying in patient overlapping rows. The pitch of the roof is sharp, in the old Dutch fashion that the snow may slide from it in friendly avalanches rather than gather upon it in dangerous weight. From within the second story of the house, looking up, one can see the underside of these shingles between the rafters, and the dim, regular light of day filters through them in summertime in soft, dust-filled beams. Tonight, of course, no light filters down, only a deep velvet darkness, and the slow, faint sigh of the wind passing across the ridge of the house. The chimney stack rises through the heart of the dwelling, a great, broad column of stone built up around the wide-mouthed hearth and carried up through the upper rooms and out at last through the very peak of the roof. The chimney, like the walls, is of fieldstone bound in lime mortar, but its stones are larger and chosen with even greater care, for the chimney must withstand both the great upward draught of the fire and the slow, inevitable settling of the roof. Within the chimney's body, somewhere far above, a dark and patient passage carries the smoke upward in a long, languid column, and as the smoke rises it cools, slows, and finally drifts free at the top as a soft, lazy plume in the moonlight outside. The windows are small, no larger than a forearm wide and a forearm tall, each composed of 9 or 12 diamond-shaped panes of pale, slightly green-tinged glass set into a leaded frame. The windows are deep set, owing to the great thickness of the stone walls, and at each window there is a broad inner sill, deep enough to hold a stoneware pot of geraniums in summer, or, as tonight, a small folded shawl awaiting its next wearer. The wavy glass of the panes is a soft, distorting medium, so that the world beyond, the snowy fields, the bare apple trees, the dark line of the distant forest, appears subtly altered, as if seen through a memory rather than through the open air. To stand within these walls, to feel the weight of these beams above, to know that the chimney rises like a warm spine through the very middle of the house. To understand all this is to feel the deep quietude of a sheltering thing. The house is not fancy, the house is not large, but the house is solid and patient and entirely sufficient to its purpose, and within its bones an entire small life is held safe through the long winter night. We pass now from the great hearth-room into another low doorway, set into the inner stone wall and trimmed with a heavy oak lintel upon which someone has carved more than half a century ago the date 1693 in numerals as plain and patient as the man who chiselled them. The doorway leads into the slapkamer, the sleeping chamber, and as we cross the threshold we are met by a deeper, cooler quiet, a quiet that smells faintly of fresh straw, of pressed lavender, of clean linen long stored in a chest of cedar wood. The slapkamer is a smaller room than the hearth-room, perhaps 15 feet by 12. Its walls limb-washed in the same soft chalky white, its low ceiling crossed by the same dark oak beams. There is no hearth here, but a great deal of warmth nonetheless seeps in through the thick stone wall against which the back of the great chimney rises, a wall whose stones, when one lays a palm against them, are gently warm, never hot, never cool, but pleasantly, steadily warm like the back of a sleeping cat. The principal feature of the slapkamer, however, the feature that fills nearly half the room and gives the chamber its peculiar character, is the bedstead, the box bed. 2 of them, in fact, are built directly into the back wall, side by side like 2 warm panelled cabinets, their faces of dark-stained pine, their inner cavities deep and softly shadowed. Each bedstead is closed off from the room by a pair of small wooden doors painted long ago in a sober Delft blue, their panels carved with simple geometric motifs: a turning sun, a 6-petalled flower, a pair of doves who face one another across an absent centre. The doors are open now, folded back against the wall, and within the deep, blue-shadowed interior of each bedstead the bedclothes are visible, plump and inviting in the candlelight. Within the first bedstead, the master and mistress of the house will sleep tonight, side by side upon a feather mattress nearly a foot thick, stuffed with the down of geese raised in their own backyard. Beneath the feather mattress lies a thinner straw mattress called a tick, which itself is laid upon a network of taut hempen ropes laced through holes in the bedstead's wooden frame, for there is no metal here, no springs, no manufactured anything. The ropes are tightened every few months with a wooden bed key, and when the ropes are properly tight, the whole structure breathes a single satisfied creak upon the lying down of its sleeper. Above the mattress, the bed has been made with the careful precision that the mistress of the house learned from her own mother, who learned it from hers in a chain reaching back to some half-remembered village near Utrecht. The lower sheet is of fine hand-spun linen smoothed to glassy whiteness by long summers of bleaching upon the grass. The upper sheet is identical. Above the upper sheet has been laid a thick woolen blanket, and above the blanket a heavy down-filled quilt, its outer cover stitched in long, gentle rows of a leafy pattern, the leaves worked in cream thread upon a background of soft pale blue. At the head of the bed rest 2 long, plump pillows of bleached linen embroidered along their open ends with the initials of the husband and the wife, and the year of their marriage 1736 in small, careful red stitches that have faded only the merest amount across the years. The second bedstead, slightly smaller and built against the same wall, is for the 2 younger children who sleep crosswise rather than lengthwise, so as to fit comfortably within. Their bedclothes are humbler but no less warm, a simple striped quilt, a plain woolen blanket, 2 small pillows. Wooden footboard carved in the form of a lattice separates their feet from the doors of the bedstead so that the doors may be closed without trapping a small foot. Near the inside of the bedstead on a small carved shelf rests a tiny wooden carving of a sheep, the favoured bedtime companion of the youngest child, its painted black eye perpetually alert, its painted body softened by the rubbing of small fingers. Above the bedstead, mounted to the wall on a long wooden peg, hangs a single brass warming pan. This is a long-handled implement with a flat, hinged metal pan at the end, perforated with small ornamental holes in the shape of stars and crescents. Each evening before the children are tucked in, the housewife fills the pan with a few hot embers from the hearth, closes the lid and slides the pan slowly between the icy linen sheets, drawing it back and forth in long sweeping motions until the bed is warmed through. The pan is one of her treasured possessions, brought from Old Holland by her husband's grandmother, and its surface bears a delicate engraving of 2 clasped hands surrounded by tulips. Across the room from the bedstead stands a low oak chest, the casse in miniature, used here as a storage piece for the family's woolens, extra cloaks, sweaters, knitted shawls, 2 folded blankets. The chest is plain, with iron strap hinges and a small iron lock that has long since lost its key. Atop the chest rests a wooden basin, a pewter ewer, a small clay dish containing a sliver of yellow soap, and a folded square of unbleached linen for drying the face. This is the morning washstand, for in this household, as in many, the day begins with cold water and ends with the same. Single small window pierces the outer wall of the slap kamer, set with the same diamond-paned, slightly green glass as the windows of the larger room. The window is perhaps 2 feet square, set deep into the thick stone wall, and on its broad inner sill rests a small earthenware pot containing a single sprig of rosemary, hardy and dark green even in the depths of winter, brought in months ago and tended with patience. The window is closed against the night, and a heavy woolen curtain has been drawn across it for further warmth, but the lower edge of the curtain stirs faintly, now and then in the small breath of cold that always passes around the edges of even the most carefully fitted window. Above the doorway through which we entered, mounted upon a single wooden peg, hangs a small framed text, a verse of scripture in graceful Dutch lettering, painted by an itinerant brush-writer who passed through the valley some 20 years ago. The letters are black with red flourishes, and the words read in their old calm tongue. Beheed ons in slap, and zegen onze ontwaking, watch over us in sleep, and bless our waking. The little framed prayer is older than any of the children of the house, and they have grown to read it without thinking, the way one reads the lines on the palm of a familiar hand. The slap kamer waits ready for the household's coming rest. The bedsteaden are made up. The warming pan stands ready upon its peg. The candle in the wall sconce dips its small flame in a long, slow bow as a draught slips beneath the door. And the entire chamber breathes a still, expectant peace, gathered like a held breath before the long, deep exhalation of sleep. Now, in the hush of early evening, as the sky beyond the small windows deepens from violet to the dense blue-black of full winter night, the household begins the slow, patient preparation of the evening meal. There is no haste in any of these motions. The supper does not need to be ready at any particular minute, only sometime before the youngest child grows too sleepy to lift a spoon. Time itself in this house and in this century is measured by the slow turning of an iron pot upon its hook, by the soft fall of an hourglass of fine white sand, by the gradual progress of the moon across the diamond panes of the western window. The mistress of the house, a woman of 42 named Geertje, kneels now upon a small woven mat before the open hearth, tending to the iron pot in which the family's evening supper has been simmering since mid-afternoon. Her sleeves are rolled neatly back to the elbow, exposing her strong forearms, the skin of her hands chapped slightly by the long winter and the constant labour of her household. Her apron of heavy linen woven in a small natural plaid is dusted at the front with a faint pale ghost of flour from the morning's baking, a softness she has not bothered to brush away. Her dark hair has been gathered up beneath a soft white linen cap, whose lace edge frames her face like the petals of a winter flower. Inside the iron pot, the supper turns gently in its long simmer. It is a stew of mutton, the leg of an old ewe, slaughtered late in the autumn and salted carefully into a brine, joined now in the pot by chunks of root vegetables drawn from the cellar that morning. There are pieces of pale yellow turnip, and quarters of small sweet carrots whose colour after their long submission to the broth has deepened to a glowing amber. There are wedges of golden onion that have softened entirely into the broth and now drift through it in long ribbons, sweetened by their hours of patience. There is a generous handful of dried barley scattered into the pot at the second hour of cooking, which has now thickened the broth to a rich, gentle body, and there is a small bay leaf, brittle and fragrant, that has long since released its quiet woodsy oil into the whole. Geertje stirs the pot with a long-handled wooden spoon, drawing up from the bottom the slowly thickening stew and turning it gently, never violently, so as not to break the soft, surrendered vegetables. The spoon is of cherry wood, dark and almost to black at its working end, and the warmth of the pot has, over the years, slowly bowed and warped its handle into a faint, sympathetic curve. As she stirs, the surface of the broth winks with small bubbles, each one rising slowly through the amber depth and breaking with a soft, almost inaudible sigh against the air. The fragrance that lifts from the pot is deeper and more varied than the sum of its parts. There is the clean, faintly grassy scent of mutton broth, undercut with the sweetness of slow-cooked onion. There is the warm, dusty perfume of barley releasing its starch. There is, just beneath all of this, the cool green note of a sprig of dried thyme that Geertje plucked from the bunches in the kuchen and tossed in some 20 minutes ago. The scent fills the great room and curls into the bedchambers and rises up the chimney to mingle, far above, with the wood smoke and the night air. While the stew turns and turns upon itself, other small labours gather toward the meal. The eldest daughter of the house, a girl of 15 named Antje, the same Antje whose alphabet sampler hangs upon the great room wall, is at the long oak table now, slicing the morning's loaf of dark, dense rye bread into thick, even rounds with a long-bladed knife whose handle is wrapped in a worn strip of leather. Each slice she lays carefully upon a long wooden trencher, fanning them so that no slice rests heavily upon another. The bread is dark and faintly studded with whole caraway seeds, its surface marked with a small cross that her mother cut into the dough before baking, a quiet old custom whose origin even Geertje no longer fully remembers. Beside Antje stands her younger brother, a boy of 10 named Hendrik, whose task it is tonight to bring up from the cellar a small earthenware crock of sauerkraut, made the previous October from cabbages of the family's own raising. Hendrik descends with a candle into the cool dark of the cellar, returns slowly with the heavy crock cradled carefully in both arms, and sets it upon the table with an audible little grunt of satisfaction. The crock's lid, when lifted, releases a soft, sour-sweet vapour of fermented cabbage, threaded with the brown spice of caraway and juniper berry. He fishes from within with a wooden ladle and fills a small white earthenware bowl with the pale shredded kraut, the strands glossy and faintly translucent, glistening with their own clean briny juice. The youngest child of the house, a small girl of 5 called Katrintje, sits upon a low stool by the hearth just out of the way of her mother's work, holding in her lap a small wooden trencher and a wooden cup. Her job, tonight as every night, is to count the wooden plates and cups for the table 5 in this household, and to set them out one by one when her mother says the supper is nearly ready. She counts now in a soft whisper, in the careful Dutch her grandmother taught her: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lifting each plate in turn, her small lips moving very seriously around each syllable. The candlelight from the wall sconce trembles in her dark eyes. A tendril of brown hair has slipped from beneath her small linen cap and curls along the line of her warm pink cheek. The master of the house, a tall, lean man of 45 named Cornelis, has just returned from the back rooms where he has been settling the animals for the night. He stamps the snow gently from his heavy leather boots upon the worn mat by the back door, pulls free the woolen muffler from his neck, and hangs his fur-lined cap upon the iron peg. The cold has reddened his nose and the rims of his ears. He rubs his hands together briskly before the hearth, and the firelight moves slowly across the lines of his weathered face, across the gentle laugh creases at the corners of his eyes, across the slight grey that has begun to silver his dark beard. He nods once to his wife, a brief, wordless communication that has passed between them across more than 2,000 evenings of marriage, and steps to the head of the long oak table. He lays down upon it with quiet ceremony the heavy old family Bible, bound in dark leather and brass-cornered, that he carried from the small wooden shelf in the front room. The Bible is older than he is, given to his father by his grandfather. Its pages, when opened, will release a soft, dry breath of old paper and printer's ink, and its margins are crowded with the careful pencil marks of 3 generations of readers. Tonight, after the meal, the family will gather around this Bible for the evening reading, but that is yet a small while ahead, for now the supper turns in its pot, the bread waits beneath its cloth, and the household moves softly through its slow winter dance toward the simple ceremony of the table. When the supper is ready at last, Geertje rises from her place at the hearth, lifts the heavy iron pot from its hook with the help of a long-handled iron crane, and carries it the short distance to the long oak table, setting it down upon a thick wooden trivet at the centre. Steam rises from the pot in a slow, fragrant column, climbing toward the ceiling beams and wreathing the lower lengths of the hanging ham in a brief, ghostly veil. The smell of the stew fills the room more thickly now, no longer suspended at the hearth, but diffused everywhere, a warm and savoury benediction. Each member of the family takes a place at the table. The arrangement is unspoken and unvarying, a quiet inheritance of habit. Cornelis settles into the broad-armed chair at the head of the table, the only such chair in the room, a sturdy oak piece carved with a low, simple back and worn smooth by years of leaning. Geertje takes her place at the foot in a slightly smaller chair near the hearth, so that she might rise easily to fetch more bread or stir the pot. Antje sits to her father's right, Hendrik to his left, and Katrintje sits beside her mother, where small spills are most easily wiped, and small mouths most easily helped. When all are seated, Cornelis bows his head, and the others, by long practice, bow theirs in unison. He folds his weathered hands together upon the worn wood of the table, hands marked with the small white scars of ploughing, of fence-making, of countless quiet labours, and he speaks the evening grace in the slow, deliberate Dutch of his upbringing. He thanks the Almighty in patient, simple words for the meat upon the table, for the bread of the field, for the warm walls about them, for the safe return of the day, and for the gentle promise of sleep yet to come. The grace is brief, no more than 3 or 4 sentences, but it is spoken with the weight of habit, with the soft dignity of a custom older than the man himself. When the grace is finished, every head lifts, and the meal begins. Geertje serves the stew with the long-handled wooden ladle, drawing from the depths of the pot great spoonfuls of mutton and root and barley, ladling them into the wooden bowls that Katrintje set out at her mother's quiet word. Each bowl, when filled, releases a fresh small cloud of steam, and the family receives their portions with a soft murmur of gentle gratitude. The bowls are passed from hand to hand, and the rye bread is divided slice by slice, each slice spread thinly with the pale gold butter from the small earthenware crock. The sauerkraut is offered in small mounded portions onto the side of each bowl. The pewter mugs are filled from a stoneware pitcher with a soft cider made of the autumn's apples, lightly fermented in the cellar, and now of a gentle golden potency, faintly sparkling. The family eats slowly with the unhurried manner of those who know they have nowhere to be. Cornelis eats methodically, dipping his bread into the broth and chewing each bite with the quiet thoroughness of a man whose mealtimes have always been the chief rest of his hard-working days. Geertje eats lightly, her attention divided between her own bowl and the small managements of the table, refilling Katrintje's mug, ladling a little more broth into Hendrik's bowl, brushing a stray crumb from her apron. Antje holds herself with the gentle, watchful self-possession of a girl on the soft border between childhood and womanhood, and she folds her bread into small pieces before dipping them, a habit she has lately adopted from observing the older women in the village. Hendrik eats with the keen appetite of a boy who has spent the afternoon shoveling a path to the woodshed, his cheeks flushed pink with the day's exertions, his eyes bright above the steaming bowl. Katrintje eats slowly with great seriousness, lifting her wooden spoon with both small hands. Conversation at the table is low and easy. Cornelis speaks of the fence he intends to mend at the south edge of the woodlot when the weather softens. Geertje mentions in her gentle voice that she met the wife of the miller this morning at the well, and learned that the miller's small son has at last recovered from his fever, news which is greeted by everyone at the table with a soft, audible relief. For the miller's son is Hendrik's special friend. Antje describes in a few sentences the work she has been doing on a new piece of needlework, a bed cover for her future home embroidered with the names of certain flowers in red thread. Hendrik tells how the brown horse stamped impatiently in the barn this evening and would not stand still for his evening hay until it had been freshened with a handful of clover. And Katrintje, in her small, breathy voice, announces that she has counted the stars through the parlour window earlier, and that there are exactly 78 of them above the woodlot tonight, a piece of intelligence which everyone receives with grave and admiring nods. Between these murmurs of conversation come long, comfortable silences. The fire on the hearth crackles softly. A log in the great fireplace shifts upon itself and releases a small fountain of orange sparks into the chimney's mouth. The wind outside touches the small windows in slow, irregular sighs. The ham hanging from the rafter sways the merest amount in some imperceptible draught, and around the table the soft music of slow eating continues. The small click of wooden spoon against wooden bowl, the quieter sound of breath drawn between bites, the satisfied exhalations after a particularly good mouthful. When at last each bowl is empty and each slice of bread eaten, and when the cider in each mug has been gently drained, Geertje rises and brings to the table a final small dish, a wooden trencher upon which lie 8 small olykoeks, fried that very afternoon. The olykoeks are round, golden-brown balls of a simple yeasted dough, fried slowly in a deep iron kettle over the hearth, then dusted with a faint snow of brown sugar from the West Indies. Inside, each olykoek is studded with a few raisins and pieces of candied citron. They are still faintly warm. The children's eyes brighten visibly at their appearance, and even Cornelis allows himself a small, slow smile. Each member of the family takes one olykoek. They eat slowly, savouring the soft, sweet density of the fried dough, the small bursts of dark dried fruit, the gentle dust of brown sugar that lingers upon their fingertips and is, with great propriety, licked clean by the children at the very end. The olykoeks are an old custom made on certain winter evenings when the household has the leisure for them, a small inherited indulgence from the fenlands of an older country. When the trencher is empty and only the smallest crumbs remain, Cornelis bows his head once more and the family with him, and he speaks a brief grace of thanks for the meal that has just sustained them. The candle on the table flutters in a draught, the fire in the hearth murmurs to itself, the night beyond the small panes deepens into its blue and quiet immensity, and the long, slow ceremony of the supper comes at last to its gentle, satisfied end. When the wooden bowls and trenchers have been gathered up and carried into the keuken, where they will be washed in the morning rather than tonight, for in this household no labor is performed after dark that does not absolutely require it. The family settles for the long, sweet middle hours of the winter evening. These are the hours that have no name and need no name. They are not work exactly, but they are not idleness either. They are the patient, useful hours during which the household, by the slow light of fire and candle, continues its small, quiet labors and tells itself its quiet stories. Geertje takes her place upon a low, straight-backed chair near the hearth, drawing toward her a small spinning wheel of polished maple. The wheel is not the great walking wheel of the wool spinners that one stands in a corner of the kuchen and is used only in summer when the windows can be opened wide. This is the smaller flax wheel designed to be sat at, and it whirs now beneath the gentle impulse of her foot upon its treadle. From a basket at her side she draws long, fine wisps of pale flax fibres, dressed and combed last summer, and feeds them carefully through her fingers into the slowly twisting thread. The thread that emerges, fine as a hair, winds itself onto the bobbin with a soft, hypnotic regularity, and the wheel itself whispers a gentle, faintly musical hum, a sound so old and so domestic that it seems almost the voice of the room itself. Beside her, Antje has drawn out her own work, the small cedar workbox in which she keeps her current piece of needlework. She opens the box with the careful pleasure of one revealing a small private treasure. Inside lies the folded square of fine linen upon which she has been working her bridal bed cover, half finished, marked across its surface with the long looping pattern of vines and flowers that she has been embroidering for nearly 2 years. Her threads are wound upon small wooden bobbins, each colour carefully chosen, a deep madder red, a faded indigo blue, a soft russet brown made from walnut hulls, and a creamy old gold dyed with onion skins. She threads her needle in the warm light of the fire, leaning forward slightly to see, and begins again the slow, deliberate motion of her stitches, each one a small, careful seed planted into the field of the linen. Hendrik, on a low stool nearby, has taken up the small carving project that has occupied his evenings for some weeks past. He is making a wooden whistle of cherry wood for himself, shaped roughly in the form of a duck, and he has now reached the careful, finishing stage in which he must hollow out the small chamber behind the duck's beak. He works with a small clasp knife, its blade slender and bright, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, his brow furrowed seriously above his bright brown eyes. From time to time he holds the half-finished whistle up to the firelight to inspect its shape, turning it slowly. Small fragrant curls of cherry wood gather upon the floor at his feet, and the room is faintly perfumed with their pale sweetness. Katrintje, the youngest, has been settled by her mother upon a thick sheepskin rug just before the hearth, where she leans against the leg of her father's chair and plays quietly with 3 corn-husk dolls of her own making, a mother, a father, and a baby, each one bound at the waist with a strand of red yarn. She tells these dolls a long, soft story of her own invention, in which the mother doll bakes a great pie, and the father doll goes to fetch a wagon-load of stars from the moon, and the baby doll, of course, sleeps. Her voice is so low and so private that none but she can fully hear the tale, but the murmur of it rises and falls through the room in a kind of small, contented melody, like a stream running gently somewhere beneath the floor. Cornelis sits in his great oak chair near the hearth with the family's account book open across his knees. The book is bound in dark leather with marbled end papers brought up from New York City the year before last, and its pages are filled with his careful Dutch hand. Upon them are recorded all the small commercies of the farm, the bushels of wheat sold to the miller, the calf bartered to the neighbour for a pair of geese, the pence and shillings paid for nails at the smith's forge. Tonight he is engaged in a small calculation, pausing now and then to dip his quill into the small inkwell that rests beside him upon a low table. The quill is of a goose feather, trimmed and slit with care, and the soft scratch of its nib upon the paper makes a quiet, intermittent music in counterpoint to the spinning wheel's low hum. Beside the inkwell on the small table rests a single tallow candle in a pewter holder. The candle is plain and unscented, its flame yellow and slightly smoky, its wax accumulating in a small soft puddle around the base of the holder. When the flame flutters, the shadows shift gently across Cornelis's face, deepening the lines at his temples and brow, making him look momentarily older, then younger, then older again, a small cycle of years played out by the light itself. For a long while no one speaks. The room is given over to the soft chorus of small sounds, the regular whir of the spinning wheel, the patient draw of needle through linen, the small scrape of the carving knife against cherry wood, the murmur of Katrinchi's quiet story, the scratch of the quill, the slow-breathing settle of the fire. Coal in the hearth shifts and falls into ash with a small papery whisper. The wind outside touches the chimney's mouth and produces a faint, distant low note, as if some great slow horn were being blown far away across the fields. After a time, Geertje begins in her low, gentle voice a quiet song. It is an old Dutch lullaby, taught to her by her own mother, a slow, simple melody about a sheep that loses its way in a snowfall and is found by a kind shepherd. The words are tender, and Geertje does not sing them loudly, only softly, almost half-spoken, as her foot continues its rhythm at the treadle, and the thread continues its silver winding. After a few moments, Antje joins her, her younger voice lifting gently in harmony. Hendrik does not sing, he never sings, but his small carving knife moves a little in time. Katrinchi listens, her dolls forgotten upon her lap, her dark eyes turned dreamily toward the fire. The lullaby ends, there is a brief silence. Then Cornelis sets aside his account book, closes the inkwell with its small cork, and takes from the low shelf beside him a slimmer book, a worn volume of devotional readings in Old Dutch, given to him by his father on the occasion of his marriage. He opens it to the place marked by a faded silk ribbon and reads aloud, softly, a single short passage. The passage speaks of patience, of the quiet seasons of life, of the small daily blessings that are given to those who take the time to notice them. He reads slowly, in his deep, unhurried voice, and the room listens, and the fire listens, and the wind outside seems to listen too. When he finishes, he closes the little book and sets it gently upon the table beside him. The candle gutters once and recovers, the spinning wheel slows, and comes at last to a contented stop. The quiet of the evening is now nearly complete, and the family sits within it as within a soft, warm garment, listening to the breathing of the house and the small farm music of the snow falling outside. The slow evening turns toward its gentle conclusion. Geertje sets aside her spinning at last, leaving the bobbin upon the wheel for the morning, and rises with a soft creak of stiff knees. She takes from a small basket beside the hearth a dark bone comb, a comb that was her own grandmother's, polished smooth across more than 100 winters of use, and crosses to where Katrinti sits sleepily upon her sheepskin, the corn-husk dolls now resting in a quiet little pile upon her lap. Geertje crouches behind her smallest daughter, lifts away the soft white linen cap, and begins with patient strokes to comb out the long brown hair that falls almost to the small of the child's back. The combing takes a long while. The hair, soft and fine as new flax, must be parted carefully into sections, and each section must be drawn through the comb from the very ends upward, lest the comb pull at any small tangle. Katrintia sits utterly still beneath her mother's hands, her dark eyes fixed dreamily upon the fire, and the firelight sets a soft warm glow at the rim of her ear and along the curve of her cheek. From time to time Geertje hums softly, almost without sound, a small fragment of the lullaby she sang earlier, and the hum vibrates faintly in the air between mother and daughter, a private bridge of comfort. When at last the hair is combed smooth, Geertje plats it into 2 loose nighttime braids, each one tied at the bottom with a small length of red yarn, the better to keep the hair from tangling during the night. She replaces the linen cap, ties it gently beneath the chin, and presses her lips lightly to the crown of her daughter's small warm head. Katrinchi sighs contentedly, leaning back against her mother's knees for a long, drowsy moment. While this small ceremony is enacted, Antje has risen quietly from her own chair and gone into the kukin, where she has filled a small earthenware basin with warm water from the kettle on the hearth. She returns with the basin, sets it upon the low oak chest near the hearth, and dips into it a small square of soft linen. With patient, gentle motions, she begins to wash the faces and hands of her younger siblings, beginning with Katrinchi, whose small face emerges fresh and pink as a peach beneath the cloth, and continuing with Hendrik, who submits with a faintly martyred expression but does not protest. The water in the basin smells faintly of the lavender that Geertje keeps in a small muslin bag with the linens, so that a quiet herbal coolness lingers upon every clean face. Now Geertje rises and goes to the warming niche beside the hearth, where the small earthenware pot of sweetened cardamom milk has been gently waiting through the long evening. She lifts it carefully out, wraps a fold of her apron around its bottom to protect her hand from its warmth, and pours the milk into a small wooden cup. She carries the cup to Katrintier, who takes it with both small hands and drinks slowly, the warm milk leaving the tiniest white tracery along her upper lip, which she licks away with great seriousness. The milk is sweet and faintly perfumed with cardamom, and it carries down with it into Katrintje's small drowsy belly a gentle invitation to sleep. Hendrik, meanwhile, has been given by his father a similar small drink, but his is a watered-down cider, lightly warmed with a sliver of stick cinnamon dropped into it. Hendrik drinks it slowly, sitting upon the rag rug, his eyes half closed, his earlier liveliness now softened entirely into a drowsy contentment. Antje takes for herself only a small sip of warm milk before she too begins her preparations for bed. Now Cornelis lifts Katrinchi from the floor. She is too tired even to walk the few steps to the slaapkamer. Her arms wind sleepily around his neck, her head drops against his shoulder, and her small face nestles into the warm wool of his shirt. Cornelis carries her with the ease of long fatherly practice, supporting her small weight in the curve of his arm as if she weighed nothing more than a folded blanket. Geertje walks before him, the candle in her hand throwing a soft mobile circle of light along the way, and Antje and Hendrik follow behind, padding softly upon the wide pine floorboards. In the slaapkamer, Geertje sets the candle upon the low chest. The small chamber is already gently warm, the chimney wall having been releasing its hoarded heat all evening. She unfolds the bedclothes of the children's bedstead with a single deft motion of her hand, and Cornelis bends and lays Katrinchi carefully upon the soft mattress. The child barely stirs as she is laid down. Her two loose braids fall to either side of her face. Her small mouth, slightly open, makes a soft, rounded shape in the candlelight, and her breathing has already begun to deepen into the quiet rhythm of approaching sleep. Hendrik, less drowsy but still subdued, climbs into the bedstead beside her. He still wears his day shirt and his woolen knee stockings, for in this household no one undresses for sleep beyond the loosening of a few ties. The night is far too cold for any greater divestment. He pulls the quilt up to his chin, settles his small dark head into the soft pillow, and turns toward his sister so that his back is presented to the cold outer wall. Geertje tucks the quilts around them both, smoothing the corners with the long, sure motions of a mother who has done this task 10,000 times. She bends and kisses each child upon the brow. Antje slides gently into her own smaller place, a low truckle bed that pulls out from beneath the master bedstead on small wooden wheels, and Geertje, after a moment, draws up a fold of quilt for her too. Then Geertje stands for a long moment beside the bedstead of the smaller children, her hand resting lightly upon the wooden frame, watching them. The candle flickers behind her, and her shadow falls softly against the wall. She speaks then, very low, the evening prayer that has been spoken in this room for at least 3 generations of children. Beheed ons in slaap, en zegen onze ontwaking, watch over us in sleep, and bless our waking. The words are old in her mouth, smoothed by long use, and she speaks them with a quiet warmth that seems to settle into the very pillows. Katrinchi does not stir. Hendrik mumbles the final word along with her, and then his eyes close entirely. Antje lies upon her side, her own eyes half shut, her hands folded beneath her cheek. Cornelis stands in the doorway watching all of this. He says nothing. He does not need to say anything. After a moment he turns, and Geertje turns with him, and together they step out of the slaapkamer and pull the small wooden door softly shut behind them, leaving within only the faint glow of the little candle that they have left to burn for the children's first half-hour of sleep, glow that will gutter and die of its own accord while the children slip down further into the warm waters of their dreams. While the children are gathering towards sleep within the warm walls of the farmhouse, another portion of the household is also settling into its long winter rest just beyond the back door in the low attached barn that the Dutch settlers of this valley call the achterhuis, or more familiarly simply de schuur, for this is one of those old combined dwellings where the human house and the animal shelter are joined under a single great roof, separated only by a thick stone wall and a heavy oak door. The arrangement is a wisdom inherited from the old country, for the warmth of the animals helps to warm the wall they share with the family, and the sounds of their quiet breathing form a low animal lullaby that travels softly through the stone into the rooms of the people. Cornelis, before sitting down to the supper, made his last visit of the evening to this attached barn. We may follow him in our imagination on the round he made then, returning now in the quietness of memory to that low warm space. He passed through the heavy oak door behind the keuken, ducking his head slightly beneath its beam, and entered into a long, low, dimly lit chamber, lit only by the slow yellow light of a single tin lantern hung from a peg. Tit's small flame protected behind perforated panels of tin, punched with a pattern of stars. The barn smells, of course, deeply of itself. There is the sweet, dry scent of last summer's hay, stacked high in the loft above and reaching down through the ladder hatch in long wisps. There is the quiet, warm scent of milk cow, a smell that is somehow both grassy and almost faintly sweet, like the breath of a benevolent, very large baby. There is the leathery, friendly scent of horse, deeper and more peppery, and the dustier, more pungent perfume of sheep. Beneath all these animal scents lies the fainter, drier smell of straw, clean wheat straw spread fresh that morning across the wooden floor of each stall, its broken stalks sending up a quiet pale gold dustiness whenever an animal shifts its weight. The cow stands in the first stall, an old red cow named Rouge, her dark eyes patient above the smooth brown hairs of her muzzle. She has been milked in the late afternoon, and her udder hangs now smaller and softer beneath her belly. She is chewing her cud, that great patient inner ceremony of cattle, slowly and rhythmically, her lower jaw moving in slow circles, her ears occasionally rotating like soft brown velvet flowers as she takes note of small sounds. Her stall is bedded thickly in fresh straw, and a small wooden manger before her holds her evening's portion of dry summer hay, into which Cornelis has scattered a small handful of flaxseed meal as a winter kindness. The hay's warm, grassy fragrance rises around her in a cloud. Beside the cow, in a stall a little wider, stands the family's brown working horse, a gelding named Bruno, of placid disposition and great strength. He is a heavy-boned, broad-chested horse, his coat the deep red brown of fresh-baked bread, his mane and tail almost black. His harness has been removed and hung upon its wooden pegs along the wall. His coat has been rubbed down with a soft straw wisp, until it gleams faintly even in the dim lantern light. His evening hay rests in a wooden manger before him, and a small wooden bucket of water sits within the stall. He stands with one hind hoof faintly cocked, the other three squarely planted, and he is half asleep already, his eyes drowsy, his lower lip drooping the merest amount, his great soft nostrils breathing slow plumes of pale vapour in the cool air. Beyond Bruno's stall, in a smaller space partitioned off by hurdles of woven willow, the household's flock of sheep has been folded for the night. There are 9 of them altogether, 7 ewes and 2 yearlings, each one with a coat of dense, off-white wool that grows long and curly in the winter months. They are bedded close together for warmth, lying down upon the straw in a loose-breathing clump, several with their heads turned upon the backs of their neighbours. Their eyes are mostly closed, their breathing is slow and gentle. Now and then, one of them lets out a small, contented bleat in her sleep, a soft, woolly murmur that means nothing in particular, and everything at once. In the far corner of the barn, in a low wooden coop fitted against the warm chimney wall, The household's chickens have already settled themselves on their roost. There are perhaps a dozen of them, hens mostly, a single sober red rooster among them. They are arranged in a long row upon a wooden bar, each bird with its feathers fluffed out into a soft round shape, its head tucked beneath one wing, its small reptilian feet curled tightly around the bar in the unconscious grip of avian sleep. The coop smells of feathers and warm grain, and the faintly sour sweetness of hen droppings, a smell that, mixed with the deeper smells of the barn, becomes something almost pleasant in its honest familiarity. 2 cats also live in this barn, tasked with the patient management of mice. The first, a tabby named Peter, lies coiled now in a tight grey and black wheel upon a folded sack atop the grain bin, his nose tucked beneath the curl of his striped tail, sleeping with the absolute conviction with which only a cat can sleep. The second, a smaller calico named Lintier, has not yet retired. She is making a slow, leisurely round of the barn, picking her way delicately among the sleeping forms of the larger animals, her small white-tipped paws making no sound at all upon the straw, her green-gold eyes bright in the lantern light. She pauses to rub her cheek against the wooden post of Bruno's stall, leaving there a faint, invisible mark of her ownership before continuing her quiet patrol. Cornelis, on his last visit of the evening, made the slow, quiet round of all this. He spoke a soft word to Ruji, ran his hand gently along the broad, warm side of Bruno, scattered a final small handful of grain into the chicken's trough for the morning's first feeding. He checked the latches of the doors, the security of the shutter that closes the small barn window against the wind. He paused for a moment beside the sheep, watching them breathe in their sleeping heap, and he thought briefly of his grandfather, who had brought the first ewes of this particular flock from a farm some 20 miles to the north, when Cornelis was himself a small boy. The animals of this house have never been treated as mere property. They are old companions, members of a household by another name, and they are addressed and tended with the slow respect that one offers to companions. Now, as the children sleep within, and as Cornelis and Geertje sit together by the dying fire, the animals in the barn move toward their own complete rest. Ruji has finished her cud at last and lowers her great head onto her own folded foreleg, sighing through her broad nostrils. Bruno's drooping lip has softened entirely. His eyes are nearly shut. The sheep have grown utterly still, a single low collective breathing rising and falling in the dimness. The chickens have not stirred for an hour. Even Lynchy the calico has at last leapt to a high beam and curled herself, paws folded delicately beneath, into a small white and orange knot of sleep. The barn breathes slowly, a single great organism of warm hay and warm hide and warm feather, sheltering its many small lives through the long white silence of the winter night. Beneath the warm rooms of the farmhouse, deep beneath the wide pine floorboards and the heavy oak beams, there lies another world of which we have until now taken only the most glancing notice. It is a world reached by a low wooden door in the cookin, a door fitted with an iron ring rather than a knob, opening upon a steep, narrow wooden stair that descends into the earth itself. This is the cellar, and it is the slow, cool memory of the household, the place in which the food of summer is kept patiently through the long, hungry winter months. Let us gently in the imagination make our way down into it now. The stair descends some 9 steps, each one a thick slab of pine, worn at its leading edge to a soft, dark gloss. A handrail of square-hewn oak runs along the stone wall to one side, polished by years of guiding hands. As one descends, the temperature drops noticeably, not to the bitter cold of the outer night, but to a steady, even coolness that the cellar holds at almost the same temperature throughout the year, summer or winter, by the gentle insulation of the surrounding earth. The smell too changes. Above, in the kuchen, the air is alive with wood smoke and herbs and baking bread. Here below, the air is cleaner and quieter, with notes of damp earth, of stored apples, of pickled vegetables in their crocks, of root vegetables in their bins, of dried fruit slowly perfuming the dark. The cellar is not large. It is perhaps 15 feet long and 10 feet wide. Its walls of the same fieldstone as the walls above. its floor of beaten earth covered in places with broad flat stones. Two small shuttered windows pierce the walls high up where the foundation meets the daylight outside, but they are closed tight tonight against the cold, and the cellar is illuminated only by the soft tin lantern that hangs from a beam, for one always brings the lantern when descending here, and it lives upon its hook between visits, ready for the next. Along the longest wall, a series of broad wooden shelves rises from waist height to almost the ceiling. Upon these shelves stand the great glass jars and stoneware crocks that hold the household's preserved bounty. There are jars of plum preserves from the late summer's harvest, dark purple as midnight, their syrup glinting faintly behind the wavy glass. There are jars of apple butter, rich and brown, sealed with squares of waxed paper tied down by twine. There are stoneware crocks of pickled cabbage, the lids weighted with smooth stones from the creek to keep the cabbage submerged in its briny juice. There are crocks of pickled cucumbers from the August garden, sealed beneath a layer of grape leaves. There are smaller jars of beach plum jam, of currant jelly, of preserved quinces glowing within their rosy syrup. Lower down, near the floor, the household's root vegetables are stored in long, low wooden bins, half filled with clean, dry sand. Within the sand, like sleeping treasures, lie carrots, beets, parsnips, and turnips, each bedded carefully an inch apart so that no two touch, the sand drawing off the moisture that would otherwise speed their decay. Bin of potatoes, those new and somewhat experimental tubers that the family has grown only for the past 5 years, sits a little apart, its potatoes resting on a layer of dry straw rather than sand. A small basket of yellow onions hangs from a peg above the bins, the onions strung together by their dried tops in a long gleaming braid. In one corner of the cellar stands a low, broad bin made of thick boards, half filled with apples laid carefully on their sides upon a thick bedding of clean straw. The apples are of 3 varieties, the dark red Spitzenberg, the rosy-streaked Pippin, and a small, hard, intensely flavoured variety the family calls simply Moderapel, or mother apple, because it came from a tree that Cornelis's mother planted as a young bride. The apples breathe slowly into the cool air, a fragrance so deep and so honeyed that it perfumes the whole corner of the cellar with the quiet ghost of last September's orchard. A few of them, the very ripest, send up a faint, sweet edge of fermentation, but Geertje will know to use those first. Against the back wall, an oaken cask rests upon a low wooden cradle. This is the cider barrel, holding now perhaps 12 gallons of sweet apple cider that has been gently fermenting since October. A small wooden spigot has been set into the head of the cask, and the floor beneath bears the faint old darkening of countless tiny accidental drips. The cider within is a dark golden amber liquid, slightly cloudy, faintly sparkling, and it murmurs to itself within the cask with the quiet, slow patience of all fermentations. Hung from the rafters above are a variety of meats cured for the long winter. A whole side of bacon, smoked dark by hickory, hangs in a sleeve of muslin. 2 dark cured hams, larger and rounder, hang nearby. A long string of dark sausages, made in late autumn from the household's own pig, hangs in a coiled, fragrant rope, its surface white-bloomed with the slow drying of months. There are also smaller things, bunches of dried mushrooms gathered from the woodlot in October, threaded upon long strings, bunches of dried sweet corn, the last cobs of the September garden, long strings of dried apple slices, each slice as thin as a coin and curled at its edges, ready to be soaked back into life for a winter pie. There is as well in this cellar a small wooden cabinet built into the very corner of the wall, with a tightly fitting door of pine. This is the cheese cabinet, and within it, on slatted wooden shelves, 3 cheeses sleep through their slow ripening. The first is a hard, dark wheel of an aged Dutch farmer's cheese, more than a year old, its rind almost black. The second is a younger, pale yellow wheel, only 6 months old, its rind softer and faintly oily. The third is the youngest, a small, fresh white round, only 2 months old, its surface still damp, its rind only beginning to form. The cabinet, when opened, releases a deep, animal vegetable, slightly salty aroma that is one of the great quiet pleasures of the cellar. In another corner stands a barrel of salt pork, the household's reserve of meat, its surface covered by a heavy wooden lid, its contents sealed beneath a thick brine. Beside it rests a smaller barrel of salt herring, brought up from the merchants of the lower river last autumn, holding within its salt the silver memory of the sea. This cellar is a quiet, slow library of food, organized not by alphabet but by harvest. September apples here, August cucumbers there, October pumpkins on the high shelf, July strawberry preserves in their little jars at the very back. To stand in it is to stand within a small edible memory of the year that has passed. Every shelf, every bin, every jar represents an afternoon of labour in some sweeter season. Geertje and Antje at the long pine table on a hot July day, slicing cucumbers, Cornelis and Hendrik in the orchard one cool September afternoon, gathering apples into wooden baskets. The whole family together, on a crisp October morning, threading apple slices onto strings beside the open kitchen window. Tonight, no one descends to the cellar. Its lantern is unlit. Its many quiet stores wait in the cool, patient dark, as they have waited every winter night for 60 years. The earth above breathes its slow protection over them. The cider murmurs gently to itself in its cask. The cheeses ripen by an imperceptible degree, and the household above, asleep or moving towards sleep, rests upon this long, cool, generous foundation of the year's gathered abundance. Let us return now to the warmth of the upper rooms, to the gentle final hours of this winter evening, and let us linger here with the household just a little longer, that we may understand something of the quiet faith and the gentle folk customs that shape every day and every night of their lives. For the family who lives within these stone walls is not merely a working family, they are also a praying family, a family bound to the long, slow turning of the sacred year, to the small daily devotions of the household, tanned to the half-remembered folk customs that their own grandparents brought with them from the soft canals and damp fields of the Low Countries. Their faith is the faith of the Dutch Reformed Church, the church that still stands in the small village some 2 miles down the river road, a church of stout fieldstone with a low square tower and a single bell that rings on Sunday mornings, on funerals and on certain feast days of the year. The Dominie. The minister of this church is a kindly white-haired man named Reverend Van Driesen, who knows every family in his parish by name and visits each household at least twice a year to inquire after their welfare. The family attends his services every Sunday, weather permitting, walking the 2 miles in good weather and riding behind Bruno in the small wooden sleigh in winter, the children bundled together beneath a great fur robe in the back. Within the home itself, however, the rhythms of faith are quieter and more domestic. Each meal begins and ends with grace, as we have already seen. Each evening after the children are in bed, Cornelis reads a passage from the family Bible, sometimes from the old Dutch Statenbijbel that his grandfather brought from Leiden, sometimes from a smaller, more recent printing in English, depending upon his mood and the page that draws his hand. Geertje listens quietly, her hands often busy with some small piece of mending. The reading is short, no more than a single chapter, and it is followed by a simple sung psalm, low and unaccompanied, whose old melody has been passed down in this household for at least 4 generations. Beyond these daily devotions, the year itself is shaped by a long calendar of seasonal observances, some sacred, some folk, often the two indistinguishable. We are now in late January in the long hushed lull between Christmas and the first stirrings of spring, but the year has just passed through several of its gentler ceremonies, and we may briefly recall them as the family itself does in their quiet talk by the fire. The greatest of these, of course, is the feast of Sinterklaas, the old St. Nicholas, observed early in December. On the evening of December the 5th, the children of this household, like the Dutch children of every household in the valley, set their wooden shoes by the hearth before going to bed. Each shoe was filled with a small handful of hay or a few raw carrots for the saint's gentle white horse. In the morning the children awoke to find that the hay had been replaced with small treats, a small wooden toy, a few honey cakes called tai-tai, a handful of hard candies, a small bright coin. The custom is older than the family can trace it, certainly older than their lives in this valley, certainly older than New York itself, and the children will speak of it through the rest of the year with the soft reverence due to a great mystery. Christmas itself, by contrast, is a quieter affair in this household, a Sunday-like day of church, a small special meal, no great gift-giving, no decoration beyond a few sprigs of evergreen above the doorway. The Reformed faith of the family is sober and unostentatious, and the Christmas observance leans more toward worship than toward festivity. New Year's Day, called Nieuwjaar, has its own small ceremony. A special pastry called Nieuwjaarskoek is baked by Geertje on the morning of the 1st of January. A thin, crisp wafer of spiced dough imprinted with a wooden mould bearing the design of a windmill, a sailing ship, or a flowering tree. The wafers are shared with neighbours who come visiting throughout the day, and visiting is itself the principal labour of New Year's morning. Every family in the valley making the rounds of every other family, exchanging small wishes for the coming year over small glasses of warm spiced wine. We have only just come through these gentle ceremonies, and now the family settles into the long, quiet middle of winter. There is no great festival ahead until early February, when the household will mark the small traditional day called Vrouwendag, the Wives' Day, in honour of the women of the household, on which Cornelis will rise especially early and bring Geertje her morning coffee in bed, old custom whose origin is dim but which neither he nor she would dream of forgetting. Beyond these ceremonies of the calendar, the household keeps a small soft fabric of folk customs woven into ordinary days. There is the small habit of placing a piece of bread upon the windowsill on the evening of the first new moon of each month, a fading custom whose meaning has been mostly lost but which Geertje continues out of fondness for her own grandmother. There is the practice, when a loaf of bread is removed from the oven, of cutting a small cross upon its crust, a custom we already noted on this evening's loaf. There is the gentle taboo against beginning any new task on a Friday. Geertje will start no quilt on a Friday, Cornelis will plant no seed, no new project of any kind will be commenced until at least Saturday morning. There is the tradition of placing a sprig of evergreen above the doors of the house at the winter solstice for protection, and replacing it again at the summer solstice with a fresh sprig. There are also the small private superstitions the family does not entirely admit to. A shoe is never set upon a table. An open pair of scissors is never left lying about. The first water drawn from a new well is poured back, in libation, into the well, before any is used in the house. Baby's first cradle must never be empty for long after the baby is grown out of it. It must be filled with a folded blanket or a small toy until the next baby comes. None of these small habits are spoken of as superstitions. They are simply the patient, half-conscious gestures by which the household keeps its own quiet luck. And then there are the small private prayers, not the formal prayers of grace before meals or the readings before bed, but the soft, almost whispered devotions that the women of the house weave throughout their day. Geertje crosses herself, in a small unconscious gesture, every time she places a fresh log upon the fire, a habit so ingrained that she would not even notice doing it. She murmurs a small word of thanks, low and brief, when she draws a clean bucket of water from the well. She says when she sees the first star of evening the same small phrase her own mother used to say, "Go denavond, leave hemel, good evening, dear heaven," though she could no longer tell anyone where the phrase came from or what it precisely meant. All of this woven together makes up the quiet, sacred fabric of the family's life. Their faith is not loud, not heroic, not theatrical. It lives in the small daily gestures, in the marked loaf, in the murmured grace, in the lullaby that turns out, when one listens closely, to be partly a prayer for the safekeeping of the lost sheep. It lives in the rhythm by which they observe the seasons and the long, slow turning of the year. And it lives most of all in the soft conviction that this quiet life, the bread, the fire, the children sleeping, the snow falling, is itself a kind of grace, a kind of small daily miracle, ordinary and sacred at once. Let us pause now, as the household pauses by its low burning fire, and let us turn for a little while away from the immediate sights and sounds of this single evening, and toward the gentler, larger questions that hover just at the edges of every quiet life. Let us think softly about time itself and about the slow turning of the seasons and about the way in which a household such as this one is woven so deeply into the fabric of the natural year that it becomes, in some sense, simply a small expression of the year, a small breathing, cooking, sleeping, praying expression of the cycle of the earth. For consider how completely the rhythm of this family's days is dictated by the slow circling of the planet around its distant fire. The year for them does not begin as it does for us, on a single agreed-upon calendar date. The year begins many times in small, soft openings. It begins on a morning in late February when Cornelis, walking out to the barn at first light, notices that the icicles along the eaves have grown a little softer, that the eastern sky carries an indefinable paler quality, that the chickens are stirring earlier in their coop. It begins on a morning in mid-March when Geertje, drawing back the kitchen curtain, sees the first small green spear of crocus pushing through the soft mud of the kitchen garden, and she stands a long time at the window simply watching it. It begins again, more decisively, on the morning when the first robin returns and sets up his liquid song from the bare branches of the apple tree, and again when the sap begins to run in the maples and the boys of the village set out their wooden buckets. It begins, in a final rich way, on the morning when the first plough is driven into the spring earth and the long, slow labour of the planting commences. And so too the year ends many times. It ends gently in late October, when the last apples are gathered and laid into the cellar bin. It ends again at the first hard frost when Geertje stands at the window watching her garden blacken in the night's cold. It ends at the first snow, which usually comes in late November, soft and unmistakable. It ends in the great quiet between Christmas and the new moon of January, in just such a stretch as the one in which we now find ourselves. For the family of this farmhouse, time is not a straight line stretching from a fixed past into an unimaginable future. Time is a slow breathing wheel, turning steadily, returning always to its starting place, carrying within itself the great certainty that the spring will come again, that the apples will ripen again, that the snows will fall again, and that the long winter evenings will once more gather the family around the low fire to read and spin and sleep. Each season is in itself a kind of small completed life, a complete arc with its own birth, its own maturity, its own quiet death. The year as a whole is the larger life that contains all four. This is a relationship with time that is, we may say without exaggeration, almost entirely lost in the world of our own century. We, who live in cities and small lighted rooms, have largely lost our daily intimacy with the moon and her slow phases, with the rising and setting of stars, with the precise progress of the sun along the horizon from solstice to equinox and back again. We measure our time by mechanisms of springs and gears, of glowing screens and humming networks, and these mechanisms are very accurate, but they are also, in a quiet way, very thin. They tell us what time it is without telling us what time it feels like. They tell us the precise minute, but not the slow texture of the hour. They do not whisper to us as the natural world whispered to Geertje and Cornelis that the year is turning, that the light is lengthening, that the sap will run again, that the long sleep of winter will end. To stand for an hour in this old stone farmhouse, even in the imagination, even in a winter night 2 3/4 centuries ago, is to remember a slower time. It is to remember a time when an evening like this one, with its slow supper and its quiet labours, and its old lullaby and its sleeping children, was itself a complete and sufficient experience, a thing that needed nothing added to it, thing that asked for no entertainment beyond the play of the fire and the soft work of the hands. It is to remember a time when the absence of distraction was not a punishment but a great patient gift, a daily entry into one's own deep quiet. And to think of this is to grow perhaps just a little softer toward our own lives, for the lesson of the old stone farmhouse is not that we ought to abandon the world we live in, nor that we ought to long painfully for a life we cannot have. The lesson is gentler. The lesson is that within any life, within our own life, in the room in which we now lie listening, there is always available, if we will reach for it, a slower kind of time. There is always available the pause between two breaths. There is always available the quiet in which the falling snow can be heard. There is always available the small private moment in which a hand rests upon a table, or a candle is allowed to gutter, or an eye lifts to a window and finds beyond the glass a single bright star. The old stone walls breathe slowly, the fire breathes slowly, the cow in the barn breathes slowly, the children in the bedstead breathe slowly, the earth itself breathes slowly in its long inhalations and exhalations of summer and winter, light and dark, growth and rest. To breathe slowly with all of these is to step out of the thin, tinny time of clock and screen, and to enter, even for the briefest moment, the deep, patient time of stones and seasons and stars. The seasons do not hurry, they do not rush. The cold of January does not anxiously check itself to see if it is on schedule. It simply lays itself softly upon the land, lasts as long as it must, and gives way at last to its successor. The winter is content to be the winter. The night is content to be the night. The hour is content to be the hour. And in this contentment lies a vast and quiet wisdom that our own age has, perhaps half forgotten, and that we may yet slowly, gently begin to remember simply by listening to the soft, slow, age-old rhythm of a household such as this one, breathing through its long winter evening, tasking nothing of time but to pass at its own gentle, immemorial pace. Let us continue in this same soft mood with another reflection, this one on the strange and gentle subject of legacy, on the small, quiet things that one generation leaves behind for the next, on the long inheritance of objects and habits and lives. For when one stands in a room such as this great hearth-room of the Hudson Valley farmhouse, when one sees the alphabet sampler upon the wall and the carved cass in the corner, and the brass warming pan upon its peg, one becomes aware very gently that one is standing within a quiet conversation between many generations, a conversation conducted not in words but in objects. Look first at the great oak table at the centre of the room. This table was made some 40 years ago by the very hands of Cornelis's father, a man named Peter, long since at rest in the small churchyard of the village. Peter cut the boards from a single great oak that grew on the family land, and he assembled the table in the very shed where the hay-rake is now kept. He pegged its joinery with hickory, never with metal nails. He chose the boards for the top with care, matching their grain so that the figure of the wood would flow gracefully from one end to the other. The marks of his plane in places are still visible upon the underside of the table, where his initials, PVR, are also faintly carved into the corner of one stretcher. That table has been in continuous daily use for 40 years. It has held every supper of Cornelis's life since his 6th year. It has supported the elbows of his father, his mother, his brothers, his sisters, his wife, his 3 children, his 3 grandchildren, yet to come. It has been the desk at which his accounts are kept, the workbench at which his harness is mended, the surface upon which the family Bible is opened each evening. When Cornelis is at last laid in the same small churchyard as his father, this table will pass to Hendrik, the boy who carved his cherrywood whistle by the fire this evening. Hendrik will keep the table. He will pass it in time to one of his own children. The table may yet stand in some kitchen of the Hudson Valley 200 years from this winter night, polished still by the elbows of unknown hands, a slow, mute testimony to the man who shaped it from a single oak in 1710. Now consider the cass, the great Dutch cabinet that stands against the wall in the front room. The cass is taller than a man, painted long ago in muted blues and ochres, its panelled doors decorated with painted bouquets of stylized flowers, tulips, roses, carnations, in a style brought from the old country and continued for generations afterward in this new one. The cass was a wedding gift from Cornelis to Geertje upon their marriage in 1736, 14 years ago. He had it made by a Dutch joiner in Albany, and he travelled in his small wagon to bring it home, the great cabinet riding on its side beneath a heavy canvas. Within its broad shelves and drawers, Geertje keeps the household's best linens, the embroidered sheets used for births and deaths, the table covers used on Sundays and on holidays, the christening gown that has held 3 babies and may yet hold many more. The cass, in its turn, was inspired by an even older cass that stood in Geertje's parents' home, which itself was an inheritance from her grandmother, brought from the Netherlands. That older cass exists somewhere still, gone to her aunt in Schenectady, and may itself someday come back into this branch of the family. The Cass in this room will, by Geertje's own intention, pass eventually to Antje upon her marriage, and so the great patient ceremony of the Cass, its careful filling, its slow emptying, its passing from mother to daughter will continue for as long as the family continues. These are the obvious legacies, the visible ones, but there are subtler legacies too, and these are perhaps the deeper ones. There is the legacy of habit, the way Geertje folds a sheet in 3 lengthwise and 3 widthwise, exactly as her own mother folded sheets, who learned in turn from her own mother, in a chain reaching back to villages that none of them have ever seen. There is the legacy of language, the small Dutch words that Katrintje will use all her life without quite knowing why she uses them, rather than the English equivalents that have begun to creep into the children's speech from their friends in the village. There is the legacy of recipe, the precise turn of the wrist with which Geertje rolls out the dough for olykoeks, learned in girlhood by patient watching and never quite explainable in words. And there is the legacy, deepest of all, of feeling. The way Cornelis loves his land, with a slow, almost wordless devotion, was learned from his father, who learned it from his grandfather, the first of the family to clear these acres. The way Geertje hums softly while she works was learned from her own mother, in whose lap she sat as a small child and listened. The way Antje folds her bread before dipping it, the way Hendrik concentrates with his tongue between his teeth, the way Katrintje counts under her breath, these gestures too were inherited, often without anyone meaning to teach or to learn them, simply absorbed by long quiet observation. And so we may say that the family who lives in this stone house tonight is not, in any simple sense, 4 or 5 separate people. They are also a long quiet river of habit and gesture and devotion, flowing down from many generations behind them and outward into many generations yet to come. The father who built the table is still here, in the table itself. The mother who taught the lullaby is still here, in the song that lifts from Geertje's lips by the fire. The grandfather who painted the Cass is still here, in the slow faded blooms upon its doors. The lives of the dead are not gone from this house. They are folded gently into the lives of the living, like long flax fibres folded gently into a single thread upon a wheel. This is, in its way, a very different understanding of life and death than our own age tends to hold. In our time, we often imagine that each person is a single, isolated existence, beginning at birth and ending at death, complete unto themselves. But in the slower time of the old stone farmhouse, no person is ever quite isolated. Each person is held within the slow stream of those who came before and those who will come after. Each gesture is rehearsed by ancestors and will be rehearsed again by descendants. Each life is a continuation, gentle and unfinished, of all the lives that came before it. And so the small acts of this evening, the supper, the spinning, the lullaby, the prayer, the comb drawn through the small girl's hair, are not, after all, small. They are vast. They are part of an endless, slow, careful weaving, in which 1,000 patient hands have already worked and will continue to work, through all the snowy winter evenings yet to come. In this house and in many houses, in this valley and in many valleys, beneath the long, slow, watchful patience of the stars. Let us draw our reflection now outward, from the single farmhouse and its small inner life, to the wider human landscape in which it is set, to the small, scattered community of houses and lives that surrounds this one, that shares its valley, that breathes the same winter air, than that is bound to it by long, slow ties of kinship and friendship and mutual aid. For no farmhouse, however solid its walls, however well stored its cellar, however warm its hearth, is ever truly alone in the world. Every farmhouse is held within a larger, gentler architecture of community, and the rhythms of that community shape the household just as surely as the rhythms of the seasons. The farmhouse stands upon a low rise looking down across the broad, slow waters of a creek that, 2 miles to the north, joins the Hudson River. From the small window of the slapkamer on a clear morning, one can see the smoke rising from at least 3 other chimneys. The chimney of the Van Wagenen farm a 1/4 mile to the south, the chimney of the Brouwer farm 1/2 mile to the east beyond a low woodlot, and the chimney of the Rooser farm a long mile to the north along the river road. These are the closest neighbours. Beyond them, scattered through the valley, are perhaps a dozen other Dutch families with whom the household is bound by long ties of kinship, marriage, and acquaintance. They are not strangers, they are not transactions. They are something for which our own age does not have quite the right word, companions in the slow, long work of living in a particular place. The bonds between these houses are constant and small. There is a steady, low, unceasing exchange of help. When the Brouwer Farm's barn roof was damaged by a great wind 2 autumns ago, Cornelis went over for 3 days and helped to repair it, accepting in return only a meal and the quiet companionship of his neighbours. When Geertje was very ill with a fever the winter before last, the Van Wagenen wife came every day for 9 days, walking through the snow with a pot of soup and a fresh-baked loaf, and stayed long enough each visit to make sure that the children were dressed and fed. When the Rooser farm lost 2 cows in a sudden disease last summer, Cornelis lent them his own bull calf for several months without the smallest expectation of recompense. None of these exchanges is recorded in any account book. They are simply the ordinary business of being neighbours in a place where neighbours are also one's only nearby help in case of need. The exchange of small goods is constant as well. Geertje sends a small portion of her every batch of fresh butter to the elderly widow de Witt, who lives alone in a small cottage half a mile down the road and no longer keeps a cow. The widow, in her turn, sends back her excellent honey, gathered from the bees she keeps in her front garden. The Brouwer wife sends sage from her great sage bed. Geertje sends in return the small green needles of the lavender she grows. Hendrik takes a basket of eggs once a fortnight to the miller's wife, and brings home in the same basket a small bag of fresh ground flour. These exchanges are not measured precisely, not weighed against one another. They are simply the daily small flowings of one household into another, like small streams running into one another, none of them quite sure which is the beneficiary and which the donor, none of them caring. And there is the simple regular pleasure of visiting on Sunday afternoons. After church and after the midday meal, it is the custom of the neighbourhood for families to call upon one another. There is no need for prior arrangement. One simply walks or rides over, and the household upon whom one has called puts on a fresh kettle of cider or coffee, brings out a plate of cakes from the kuchen, and the long afternoon is spent in low, gentle talk by the fire. The talk is mostly of small particular things, of the price of wheat at the Albany market, of the new minister at the village church, of the weather expected for the coming week, of the health of an aged grandfather a few miles away. There is little that we today would call gossip. The talk is too patient and too kind for that. There is no hurry. The afternoon is long, the fire burns low, a child falls asleep in a corner, a wife refills the cups, a husband rises at last and says, "Well, we ought to be going," and the visiting family begins, slowly, to gather their cloaks. These small Sunday visits are the connective tissue of the community, the patient stitching that holds the scattered houses into a single living fabric. They are not entertainment in any modern sense. They are simply the ongoing, low-grade conversation by which the community keeps track of itself, knows its members, mourns its losses, celebrates its small victories, and prepares for its needs. Beyond the Sunday visits, there are the larger gatherings at which the whole community comes together. There is the harvest in late September, when neighbours help one another to bring in the last of the wheat and the corn, working in long lines across one another's fields, and being fed at long boards in the farmyard at the end of each day. There is the autumn slaughter in early November, when several families combine their labour to butcher the hogs that will see them through the winter, the men working together at the heavy task of butchering, the women working together at the equally heavy task of rendering, sausage-making, salting, smoking. There is the spring barn raising, when a young couple beginning their married life on a new piece of land receives the help of every neighbour for many miles around. The great timbers raised in a single long day with the labour of 40 men, while the women tend to a great communal meal. And there are the smaller, gentler gatherings, the corn-husking bees, the apple-paring afternoons, the quilting frolics in the long evenings. These are the social pleasures of the community, the times when work and pleasure flow together, when a hard task becomes light because everyone is doing it, when the songs and the stories rise easily over the rhythm of the hands. Then there are the deeper bonds, the bonds of life and death. When a child is born to any of the families in the neighborhood, the wives of the surrounding houses come to attend the birth and to keep the new mother for the first weeks afterward, when she ought not to lift heavy work. When a death occurs, the entire neighborhood gathers within hours. The men to dig the grave and to build the simple coffin, the women to wash and dress the body to prepare the meal that follows the burial, to sit with the bereaved family through the long first night of grief. No mourning family in this valley is left to grieve alone. No new mother is left to fend for herself in the bewildering first days. The community holds its members at every threshold, gently, firmly, as a long-used cradle holds a small new life. To understand all of this is to understand what is meant by the phrase a way of life. The household of stone in which we have been listening tonight is not simply a collection of furniture and food and people, it is a node in a vast, soft, breathing network of households, all of which are held together by a long, slow web of small attentions, small visits, small gifts, small helpings. The web is invisible, it cannot be drawn on a map, but it is as real as the stone of the walls and the wood of the table, and it is in some sense the larger house in which the smaller house is held. The great patient roof above the small private roof, the long quiet rhythm beneath the daily song. Let us pause now before this final stretch of our slow journey, and let us take up one last quiet reflection, a reflection on the strange and gentle subject of simplicity itself, and on the curious beauty that the simple lives of the past hold for us. Looking back across so much distance and so much change, for, as we have wandered through the rooms of this old stone house, as we have lingered by its hearth and its bedstead and its quiet cellar, as we have considered its people and their slow customs and their long bonds with their neighbours, we may have noticed within ourselves a small, soft, almost wistful feeling, a feeling that this old life was in some way more beautiful than our own, even if it was also, in 1,000 visible ways, harder. Let us consider this feeling honestly, gently, neither dismissing it as mere romance nor surrendering to it without thought, for it contains perhaps both a truth and a small soft trap, and it is worth lingering with both of them in our minds for a few minutes here, in the warm circle of the dying fire. The truth in the feeling is this, that the life of the old stone farmhouse possessed a kind of integration, a kind of seamless wholeness that our modern lives often lack. Every object in this house had a purpose, and every purpose was understood by every member of the household. The chair was made by an uncle of wood from a tree on the family land, and was used every evening by the same hands that shaped it. The shirt upon the boy's back was woven from flax grown in a particular field by his mother, dyed with walnut hulls gathered by the boy himself. The bread upon the table was baked from grain ground at a mill the family knew, by a man whose name they spoke, from wheat grown on a field whose every stone they could recognize. There was almost no anonymity in this life. Every object came from a known source, was made by a known maker, was used for a known purpose. The world was small and legible, and everything in it could be read, like the careful pages of a familiar book. This integration is, in our age, almost entirely lost. The chair we sit upon was made in some factory we have never seen, by hands we will never know, of materials gathered from countries we may never visit, by processes we cannot describe. The shirt upon our back has, perhaps, travelled across 3 oceans before reaching our shoulders. The bread upon our table has been milled by machines we cannot picture, of wheat grown in fields we will never walk. We live in a vast, tangled, magnificent network of unseen hands and unknown places. And this network gives us things in such abundance and such cheapness as no farmhouse of 1750 ever dreamed of, but it gives them to us at the cost of a certain knowing, at the cost of being able to read our world the way the old family could read theirs. So this is one truth in our soft feeling for the old life, that something, indeed, has been lost, and that the loss is real, and that it is worth acknowledging without dramatizing it. But there is also a soft trap in the feeling, and it is worth seeing the trap clearly. The trap is this, that we may, in our wistfulness, forget how very hard the old life was. We may forget that the same Geertje who hummed by the fire was likely to bury 2 or 3 of her own children before her work was done, that Cornelis, who read by candlelight, could expect to die in his 50s of an illness that we today would treat with a single pill, that Antje, the young woman embroidering her bed cover, might be widowed in childbirth before her 30th year. We may forget that the warmth of the hearth was bought at the cost of months of heavy axe work in the woodlot, that the bread was bought at the cost of long days behind a plough drawn by a single tired horse, that the cheese in the cellar was bought at the cost of long mornings on a milking stool in a frozen barn. We may forget that the integration of the old life was also, in a quieter sense, a kind of confinement, that one rarely travelled more than 30 miles from one's birthplace in a lifetime, that one's marriage prospects and one's livelihood and one's whole horizon of experience were narrowly bounded by the small valley in which one happened to be born. To remember the truth of this hardness is not to dismiss the beauty of what was lost. It is to see both sides at once, to hold them gently together, and to ask perhaps the deeper question that our wistful feeling really wishes to ask, not whether we should return to the old life which we cannot, but whether we might, even in our own different and gentler and freer life, recover something of the slow, integrated beauty that the old life held. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.